Welcome to the AUA Inside Tract Podcast. Today's Inside Tract Podcast is brought to you by the Residents and Fellows Committee and was originally presented during the Residents Forum program at AUA 2022 in New Orleans. Panel moderator Dr. Ruchika Talwar is joined by Drs. Todd Morgan, Yaw Nyame, and Suskind and Gregory Tasian for a discussion on grant writing tips for residents.
For our final panel today, we'll tackle the topic of grant writing. Many residents feel intimidated by the thought of applying for a grant. Today's panel will hopefully keep you seeing that there are many opportunities open to residents and that receiving grant funding really isn't as scary as we think it is. We have a great panel today, so I'll ask our panelists to come to the stage. I'll actually be moderating this one, but again, we want to keep this as interactive as possible, so I do encourage any people who have questions, please come up to the mic earlier rather than later. I'll start out by introducing our panelists. Dr. Morgan is the Jack Lapides Professor and Chief of Urologic Oncology at the University of Michigan and an expert in prostate cancer and tumor genetics. Then we have Dr. Nyame, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Urology at the University of Washington and a rising star in urologic oncology. We have Dr. Suskind, who's chief of neurourology and female pelvic medicine and reconstructive surgery at UCSF. She has several NIH grants, including an R01, R03, K12, and T32. And last, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Tasian, who's a tenured associate professor of surgery and epidemiology at the University of Pennsylvania Perelman School of Medicine, as well as the director of a 26-site PCORI-funded PKIDS trial. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to dive right in. You know, a lot of barriers to residents obtaining grant funding is that they stumble upon important clinical questions that are within their day-to-day patient care tasks. Often, lack of protected academic time or funding is a major barrier to seeing some of these more simple projects, all the way through. We'll start with Dr. Nyame. Could you share some advice for trainees who may be looking at funding mechanisms to support these smaller scale research endeavors?
Yeah, so I think two things that you really have to identify, especially at a trainee level when you're thinking about a grant. And the first is going to be what the mechanisms are and the frequency at which they come. And so, for some mechanisms like the AUA Care Foundation, every year that around the same date that this mechanism is going to become available. And I think the more you can plan ahead for those due dates, which a lot of us do now in our practice when we're thinking about when the R01 submission dates. I mean, it takes a lot of planning to get a grant together. I, as a resident, sort of functioned in this, like, you're gonna do this project, here's a database, whatever, and you sort of gave yourself like the minimum amount of time to get that project done, and I think successful grants take a lot of planning and a lot of time. The second thing is mentorship. And most of the awards that you're putting in are going to be mentored awards. And a lot of that is what you're going to want to demonstrate in that, in addition to some sound science, is going to be some plan that you're going to learn something. And I didn't understand that when I was putting in grants as a resident, that was a huge component of what the evaluators were going to be looking for, which was, what is the team around you? What are the resources around you? What are you going to learn? And I was really worried about how creative and great my idea was. And it's taken me to this early career point to understand what a development award really is.
That's actually the perfect segue into my next question. An important aspect of success in academics is indeed mentorship, as you just alluded to. Dr. Tasian, can you discuss your strategies on establishing new mentoring relationships?
Yeah, I think it's both intentional and organic. I think a lot of times when we're at our own institutions, there are various research training programs that arise. At Penn, it's primarily the Masters of Science in Clinical Epidemiology or Translational Research or Health Policy. And then from there, being involved in those programs gives you the opportunity to work with trainees and mentees in a very systematic way. And that's one way of doing it, and I think it's important. And I think it's particularly important for surgical investigators and residents and fellows to think about research training as part of their continuum of education that it doesn't necessarily stop with residency, and that if you're really interested in having a research career, consider formal research training because it doesn't happen in residency. And then the second is opening yourself up to those opportunities that arise from your natural relationships within a research or within a residency program. And you don't have to be constrained by content area. I think we all share a similar thought process, methodology, that if you're aligned in what the question is and how you're going to be approaching it, you can seek out mentorship from an endourologist, even if you are dealing with oncologic content. A lot of the mentees I have as a pediatric urologist are in adult spaces, including adult neurosurgery, other content areas. But as long as you are conversant in the methodology and can appreciate differences in content and where those knowledge gaps are, I think you can have a very fruitful mentor-mentee relationship.
That's very true.
I just want to kind of emphasize that point. None of my current mentors are actually urologists. And so right now my mentors are a rock star colorectal surgeon and a geriatrician. And, in my fellowship training, my research mentors, I'm an FPMRS trained urologist, but my research mentors were urologic oncologists. And I got absolutely everything I needed from those mentor relationships. So I think you almost learn more from mentors outside of your immediate world because you're able to kind of put pieces together.
When you guys meet with mentees for the first time, do you set expectations, or how does that conversation go? I'm always interested in how others kind of handle this.
Yeah, so I had shared this, probably it's not a checklist, but it's a way to align expectations. So one of my mentors had shared it with me years ago, but it's a simple one-page PDF where both the mentor and the mentee fills out what their expectations are on like a Likert scale. And it goes anything from like frequencies of meetings to expectations of like content knowledge, the degree to which a mentor should be involved in like the writing and revision process. And then that initial meeting is really spent discussing and aligning those expectations, which I have found to be incredibly helpful for the future relationship so that you know where each is coming from.
Can you share a little bit of advice for us on how to be good research mentees?
I think there's a lot to being a good mentee, and I really actually start this conversation always with ultimately the mentor owns a lot, and so don't the mentee should not feel like they have to put everything on the mentee, like it's you guys, and the mentor has a lot of responsibility to respond to email, to be available for meetings, to not be the one sitting on a paper for 3 months. So we own that. So that I just wanted to kind of start with that. The mentee also, there's a lot of things the mentee can do to help the relationship. So I have a couple mentees who I have really frequent meetings with, weekly meetings, for example. The mentee is in charge of those meetings, and the mentee sets the agenda. It's really helpful when my mentee can, if something's really important, send that out a day ahead. Here's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Can you have just a quick glance at this? That's really, because even if I just have 5 minutes to, take a quick look, that discussion, we can take maximal advantage of that time. So those meetings, if you have that relationship with a mentor where there's some cadence of meetings, to just absolutely maximize those opportunities, be prepared with an agenda, a game plan. And, just like for all the various meetings that I have to schedule, if I don't have something, if it's something that can be dealt with over email, then, I'm going to cancel a meeting. I'm going to say, here's the quick hitters, and so that's okay too. But that's, one, I'm going to hand it over to you guys, but that's one key piece of advice, I think.
And I think just another way of saying that is I think it's really up to the mentee to drive the relationship and to kind of know what they want to get out of it, and also to express that, because sometimes the mentor may not know exactly what the mentee expects. So I think that those initial meetings, and I think it's okay to shop around for mentors, talk to a lot of different people, see who, you kind of hit it off with, see who you like to work with and where there's a good fit. And then when you find those people, really tell them, I want to, you to help me with this. Would you like to, do this? It's a reciprocal relationship, right? I think a lot of times people enter into these relationships and there's a lot of assumptions. And so, as a mentor, if a mentee's really clear with me of what they are looking for, hey, I'm there, I'm all in, and I can give them exactly what they want. But if I'm not sure, it's hard for me to match that. And I completely agree, with setting agendas. Oh my gosh, you just get so much more done. And it really shows that it makes me feel like the mentee values my time and values their time, and we're going to meet, and we're going to get a whole lot accomplished, and it helps, in so many different ways. So yeah, and I think it's up to the mentee to kind of schedule the cadence that is right for them in terms of the meetings. It's not really up to the mentor to be like, oh, I haven't heard from you. You can do that, but I think it's important for the mentee to say, I'm interested in meeting with you once a month, once a week, once a quarter, whatever it is, and to follow through and to set up those meetings.
I would echo, to me it comes down to two things, right? I think good communication and accountability. And so I think in that communication, you can set those expectations around what the deliverables are going to be. I think mentees often undervalue how much they give back to their mentors in a variety of ways. But if you're not communicating, if you're not engaged, if you're not staying accountable to the things you say you're going to do, then you have a hard time allowing that relationship to grow, because that's what happens over time. The other thing I'll say about mentorship is that we often think about mentors as like that one person, right? Dr. So-and-so made my career. But oftentimes, if you really think about mentorship, it's a wide network of different relationships, and I think you really need to work on cultivating that. We don't do that very well in medicine. It's just not our structure. But if you go to other industries, that's how they function. People have these broad relationships and broad networks that allow them to have different opportunities to have those conversations. And I've tried to take advantage of that. I'm sitting next to Todd. When I was putting my CDA together, I scheduled an impromptu, can I have 30 minutes of your time just to bounce some ideas off of you, and that to me was a mentorship relationship, even though Todd and I literally had just a handful of conversations at that point. So I think you want to think about taking full advantage of your ability to communicate, but I think more importantly, do what you say you're going to do, because I think that's what starts to get you that sort of reciprocity and that growth.
Shifting gears just a bit, Dr. Suskind, can you talk about how best to find the right funding mechanism based on a specific type of project?
Well, I think I can talk to some opportunities I know about. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, just vague, again, I think the challenging thing, especially in this room, is we have people of various interests. Some people are interested in basic science. Some people may not really be interested in a heavy research career, but have a small little idea. Yeah. What's some advice that could apply to either one? Where do you start? Do you just go on Google and say, I need some money?
And first of all, I think unless it's like an NIH grant, which I don't think we're talking about in this situation, it's okay to shop around the same grant to a lot of different mechanisms. In fact, I would definitely do that and increase your chances of getting funded. And sometimes you can accept funding on the same grant from multiple sources because they're small amounts and it's not enough to do any one project. I can share some I think go to your subspecialty organizations. A lot of them have small kind of seed funding for grants. And I tell you, once you get that first grant, it's like, an accelerator. It's a grant accelerator. It's much easier to get the next one because you put that on your CV and it's like total street cred, right? And so it's like just I think the first grant I ever got was from the Society of Women in Urology. So it's the Elizabeth Pickett Award. It was $1,500, okay? Not enough to really do any research. But once I got that, I just started getting more and more grants because I could use that, right? And so that, we're actually, I sit on the board of that organization now. We're growing the amount of that award, hopefully. So for the women in the audience, that's one great area. You know, if you're FPMRS related, SUFU has these grants as well in that topic area. And, you know, there's a lot of, you know, I think each subspecialty organization has something of that sort. The AUA has grants as well. So I would kind of go down those avenues. And also, you know, each institution, you know, usually has some sort of small funding mechanism. It's going to be different everywhere. But talk to other people who have, you know, done what you want to do. I mean, I think that's the best thing to do as well, is see someone who has what you want and came from where you are or somewhere near where you are, and talk to them and see what resources they have to recommend.
I'll chime in. So definitely like the AUA subspecialty organizations for sure, lots of foundations, but also your chair has money, okay? Where's Matt? Sorry. Your chair has money, and it may not be a lot of money, but your chair has money to support small projects. And what they might say is, okay, write a proposal. Are you really, how committed to it are you? How interested are you? You know, how passionate are you? What's your future? What are you going to do with this work? What are your goals, right? You can imagine. But in terms of getting little pockets of money to get important work moving, that is definitely a resource, and it's okay to ask and broach those topics with faculty and your chair.
And along those lines, you know, as some of us embark onto fellowship or maybe graduating fellowship or even taking an academic job after residency, these are things that people often mention to build in your first contract, things like seed funding, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you? How much to ask for, what kinds of things to ask for?
Yeah, so and that's a big topic, and it really depends on what your goals are. You know, are you kind of looking for a, say, clinician educator job that is in academics, that is, you know, you're going to hopefully have 10% or 20% of your time that's research focused, and that's going to look a lot different than if your goal is more of a surgeon scientist track of a 50-50 position. And so for the former, you know, carving out the time is probably the most valuable, and trying to negotiate some seed funding, you know, maybe $50K, that would be a great start, I think, for somebody on that track. For somebody who's looking for a surgeon scientist position, and it's going to depend, is it more of a, say, health services researcher versus laboratory, and that looks different, but we're talking about people who are really expensive, a tech or an analyst, and years of protected time and years of funding, and certainly that's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you need to have built that case that you can take that money and time and reach your goals of future grant funding, which is and you know, clinically important research.
And one last question before we open it up. You know, applying for your first grant can be very overwhelming. Some seasoned researchers recommend, you know, using things like an outline. Can you all just share a little bit of strategies for someone who just wants to even get started?
Yeah, as the youngest person on the panel, I'll start. So a few things that I wrote down in preparation for today, and I was talking to Ridwan out there about this outside before I came in. You know, when it comes to writing grants, it is a complete unknown for us until we do the first one. You know, you think about how you learn how to write a paper and how much medical literature you consume and read, and you understand the cadence and the flow and the structure. You don't have that for your first grant for most people. So read grants. Ask people for their grants. Ask people who are further along in their career that have grants they finished, and you know, folks that are more likely to share them with you, because the structure of a grant is completely different. The language is different, and I think getting familiarity with that is really important.
grant writing is not creative writing, right? It's very formulaic. And so what you're saying is completely true. I just want to emphasize it. Get examples from people who have been successful and, incorporate those kind of modules.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's the same, Ruchika, you're talking about, starting with a clinical project. Like, one of the biggest barriers is often those clinical projects are rather ill-defined. You have, and Jane's heard me say this multiple times, what's the question? You have to distill that down until it is so crystal clear that there's no ambiguity there. It's the same thing for a grant. You want your aims to be so precise that you can build everything around there. And that process of writing your aims takes the longest part of the grant. And then it's building the structure around it. But it's that thoughtfulness, that reflection, that contemplation, that revision, that you need to have such precision with that, and then you go forward.
And get it done early. I know that's hard to do,
Yes.
but it's so important to show the finished product to multiple different people and be able to incorporate their feedback, because it will save you so much time. The feedback that you get are exactly the same kind of comments that the reviewers are going to give you, and you can stave off a lot of those comments. But you have to give people a good, I'd say, 2 weeks or more to read your grant, and then allow yourself time afterwards to really soak it in, maybe make some major changes. But I think the more people you can talk to and get their thoughts and ideas, it really is helpful. It takes time.
Yeah. I was sorry.
No,
I was just gonna, this is a little bit of a pivot, but when I was a resident, there was a grant writing workshop that I went to that was really for basic scientists, and I sat in, and that was the first time that I saw a specific aims page. Look for those opportunities. They exist on your campuses. There are great ways to start thinking about what a grant looks like. The AUA has an early career investigator workshop. Advocate for yourself to attend something like that. That was really helpful for me.
And it gives you a structure to get going.
And it gives you opportunity to have someone talk through why your aims page or your project looks good, what the weaknesses are. And then my last caveat about grants is assume your reviewers don't know anything about what you're writing. And this is that part of grant writing that no one tells you about, right? You spend all this time learning every big word in the nomenclature, and just like you write your first grant and you use all these abbreviations, and you could have a basic scientist who doesn't know what a prostate is evaluating your project. So my goal is to write it to the level of an 8th grader. I want to be able to explain it to, my cousin, my little cousin, and have him be like, this is a cool project. And I think if you can start to build that particular skill too, it will allow you to be successful.
And you're reminding me, I always have someone non-medical read my grants for that.
Yeah, my wife is an artist. She reads every grant.
As an example of that last point, I've been on an American Cancer Society study section for years, and I end up with melanoma grants, glioblastoma grants, right? Breast cancer, totally out of my field. So it also depends on if you're applying to the Prostate Cancer Foundation, well, they're going to know a heck of a lot about prostate cancer, whoever's reviewing it. If you're applying to the ACS, yeah, you better really tell them why it's important and convince them. The other thing, just to make sure, I think it's point of emphasis. So right, the aims page, not everybody who's probably familiar with an aims page, but it really distills your grant down to like the one-page elevator pitch. This is what I'm doing. This is what the background is. This is why it's so important, why there's a huge need for this. And these are the ways we're going to attack this problem. And that you just ask any writer in any field. They're going to write, and they're going to delete, and they're going to write, and they're going to delete, and they're going to send it. And it's, you don't get attached to anything you write until you've shown it to lots of people, gotten tons of feedback, and through that process, you end up with something you're like, oh, actually, this is pretty good. I think we can go. And then you get to start writing your grant and kind of go through the same process. But once you set yourself up with that aims page that you feel really good about, have a just absolutely crystal clear idea in your own mind of what you're doing, then you can start to explain it. If you don't have a perfect idea of what you're doing, the experimental plan, why it's important, it's going to be very hard to write that grant.
I'm going to open up the floor to some questions. I see we already have a line, so please feel free.
One of the things we've talked about is, negotiating protected time. And as just kind of a question for all of the panelists is, on paper, what is your protected time, and what is it in reality? And then, how do you protect your protected time as a budding researcher? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, and it's a question that continually arises through one's career. The initial conversation is when you're first negotiating your position, and then I would say, as Todd said, you got to start with your goals. Start 5-10 years out, and then build back from there. You have to know where you want to be in 5-10 years, and then fill in what it takes to get there, and that's going to look different for everyone. But then you're negotiating not for you, but for what you can bring, what discoveries you can make to the division, the department, the university. So it takes the focus off on you, but I'd start being gold focused. When I initially started out, I negotiated for 50% protected time, and I had 50% protected time. Then when my K finished and I had a couple R's and PCORI, et cetera, my grant funding is I have 100% of my time covered by grants, but I still spend 40% of my time clinical because my clinical efforts and research efforts are perfectly aligned. You're going to have to make sacrifices to do that.
We need to delete the recording though now. Hey, this can't be recorded.
Yeah, well, so
CMS is calling.
But I do think it is possible when your clinical efforts feed into your research efforts. So every patient that I see and operate on is in a clinical trial. And without that clinical effort, it wouldn't happen. So I think that's going to look different, but I would say aligning your clinical efforts with your research efforts is critically important, but it involves sacrifices. I do a very limited scope of pediatric urology, and that's a trade-off that I was willing to make.
So my experience is 50-50, and usually funded whatever, somewhere around 50 to times 70+%, but I do everything I can to actually try to be 50-50. Does the clinical work move into the protected time? Absolutely, all the time, and that's it's the nature of being a surgeon scientist. It's very hard to find that balance. How do you set yourself up for success? You find institutions that really value research, that really will support you in protecting your time and make it that's part of the lifeblood, and that's what the department values. That's what the institution values, and you try to not be your own worst enemy by doing more clinically because it's really great and rewarding than we can do. Then if we're trying, you can't do everything, you can't be everywhere at all times. So we make decisions, and you have to make intentional decisions. And again, when you're thinking about positions, hopefully not going somewhere where they have wow, we really need somebody to come in here and do 100 radical cystectomies, per year. That's going to be very tough to protect your time.
Yeah, and I think you'll very quickly know up front when you're looking for a job. At least I was very honest. My first conversation when I was looking for a job is, I'm really looking for a place that will support me to be 50% research. And a lot of places, are like, oh, that's great, that doesn't exist. Well, it does exist, but just be honest about what you're looking for. It makes your pool of jobs available to you less. But I think that's really important. But if that's the route that you want to go, then you have to be really serious about, going after funding and producing.
Just quickly, I'm at 50% as well. As a new faculty, it was easy to have that 50% time be 50%. Sometimes it was 60, and I was sad. Now it's a lot harder to protect that time. So, but similar to what Todd mentioned, I try really hard to make it actually 50% for a variety of reasons.
One of the strategies, by the way, is you get rid of new patient slots in your schedule to the extent you have control. So that's your inflow, and so that's a very tangible thing that you say, okay, wow, I'm it's my research time I'm losing. I'm going to drop a new patient slot.
Could you guys touch a little bit on how you've dealt with failures in the grant writing process? Obviously, not every grant gets funded, and it's getting harder every year. How have you, and you don't always get feedback with some reviewers, how have you kind of gone back to the drawing board? You kind of touched on it a little bit with showing other people, I guess, but how do you approach it, especially when you don't get reviewer responses?
Yeah, my answer will probably be the shortest. I think everyone who writes grants has a failure folder, and myself included. I expect that to fill up over time. But I think one of the fun things about grant writing, and not everyone likes grant writing, by the way, but one of the fun things is like that content is never wasted. You know, you repurpose it and you elevate it and you shift it, but it's always going somewhere if you really believe in the projects that you're working on. So that's a line stolen directly from John Gore. If he was here, he'd probably like raising his hand like, what the heck, dude? But I think that you have to learn from them. I will say you don't always get feedback. So if you don't get the score or whatever, sometimes try to reach out and find out what they didn't like about it.
Yeah, there's this really interesting article that I recently came across that looked at failure, and it tried to model failure and versus success. And they looked at 3 groups. They looked at researchers getting NIH funding. They looked at venture capitalists getting funding, like their first round of funding, and then they looked at terrorists having successful terrorist attacks. No joke. And they put them all together in the same model, and they found the same thing, that people who were successful in each of these endeavors were just the ones who tried the most, had the most tries, okay? So it wasn't those who, had a failure and then thought about it for a long time before they tried again. It was those that just kept trying, regardless of any of those 3 domains, which I thought was interesting, and that's so true. I think you just have to keep going, and it's hard, it's demoralizing, right? But it's like any contact sport, the more touches on the ball, the better you get, and you just got to keep going.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you all for being here. Quick question, in terms of mechanisms for protecting your time, are there things such as advanced practice providers, covering your inbox, or other things that we should be thinking about writing into contracts before we start?
That is such a great question, and something that I didn't think about raising, but I would say it's critical, and that I think has been instrumental in the success of having grants and being able to conduct research. We have a huge APP team. I think we have 14 PAs or NPs. Ruchika can talk about this at CHOP. Whom partner with us in seeing patients in clinic, doing the documentation, following up. We have a big administrative team who schedule, dedicated administrative assistants who schedule meetings. All of those things eat your time. The more that you can protect yourself from that, the more you're going to be able to do those activities only you can do. That's something that I think isn't quantitated in a lot of ways in those negotiations, but I think if there's one thing that I had knowledge of now that I could go back and really think about, it would be that. Great question.
Do you all feel that you're supported in your clinical practices in terms of having APP or resident coverage for things like that? Because, like our last panel touched upon too, it's hard to balance your time. And I think especially early on, making sure you feel like you're clinically available, you're saying yes to all those hard cases, that really eats away at the time you would have to sit down. So, if you guys can share a bit about that, as well as how to maybe break up the process of writing a grant into parts so that you can accomplish small tasks in specific windows of time.
For me, I can't do an hour here and an hour there when it comes to writing. I need to block off a half a day because it just takes that much time to get into it and for me to be productive. So that's hard to block a half a day. And so when I write a grant, I just kind of go through my schedule and I just block a half a day and I just do my best to not schedule any meetings. And it sounds simple. It's a hard thing to do. And then, making a timeline is as cheesy as that sounds, is really, really important, and sticking to it and maybe sharing it with someone else so you feel more accountable can be helpful. But for me, I need to think in half-day chunks, at least.
So I thought that APP question and support question is really important, and it's a good one, great one. I think so. 2 things. One is, of course, you want as much support as you can get. Obviously, it's more, the more help you get to manage the clinical side of things, the more you're going to be able to protect your time. That said, I think it is very hard to get more support in that way than your partners, realistically. And even though you'd like to think, I'm just thinking, what if, let's say we hired a surgeon scientist and let's work to protect them. could we, it wouldn't be very equitable, I think, or would be at least seen as inequitable potentially. And so really the question is, does this place, again, do they value research? Are they supporting the clinicians overall? Is there an opportunity for more APP support? Am I going to be put in a situation where I have less APP support than other more senior clinicians? Well, that's not great. So that's where I would see some opportunities for like, okay, let's make sure I'm not being like, here you go, good luck, but I actually have what other urologists in the group have access to, not less, but it'll be hard to get more, I think. So yeah, so in terms of like just getting going, you can do things like, yeah, I do this block calendar to boom, grant, 4 hours, 6 hours. Got to do it weeks in advance or else it's going to fill up. But it's not like put it on the calendar. You can cancel a clinic, right? I mean, hopefully you'll have support from your chair, et cetera. But I've definitely done that before, no problem. Like tons of like, you have to be very organized, like way in advance. Grant deadlines in June. It's 6 months before that. Okay, that cut the few weeks before, maybe like the 3-4 weeks before, we're going to be really busy. I'm going to cancel clinic. I'm going to put days on my calendar. You can do that, and that's so you have some control. It takes some foresight, but those are some tricks that can definitely help.
And just to round us out, do you have any pearls of wisdom that you'd like to impart on the audience here? Anything you wish you would have done differently early on?
Sure. I guess my pearl of wisdom is we've all sat at this forum at different times, and you don't know, like, can I do this? Boy, that sounds really like cool, but I don't know. The answer is you can do it. And you're gonna meet tons of people that say you can't be a surgeon scientist. It's outdated. It's a thing of the past. It's like there are no jobs. There are jobs. It takes a lot of work. You have to really love it. You have to like really love it. If you kind of half love it, maybe not. It's not the best thing for you. We have to organize our lives and our professional goals and align them with what is really like in our heart. But if it is in your heart and you want to do it, you can do it. I guarantee you, all of us will help you. Like Yaw said, somebody calls me like, or emails, can I meet with you for 30 minutes, hour, whatever? Yeah, well, I send them a grant, 2 grants, however many grants I've written. Absolutely. You're all welcome to reach out to me at any time. So anyway, that's my take home. You can do it.
And we talk about it in all these sorts of venues, but we don't really talk about how fun it is. And I think we all really enjoy what we do. I think it adds a whole other element of just innovation and discovery. And I feel like I get to be creative in ways I don't get to be creative in my clinical work, and I get to build things and collaborate with people and talk with people like this. And for me, one of the best parts of it is being able to mentor and teach other people. And so it really is a lot of fun, and I think it adds just so much more personal gratification to my job. It adds a lot of flexibility to my life, and it makes me, want to go to work every day. So it is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm completely aligned with Ann. It is, the creativity is the biggest joy that I get. And it's something that just fills me rather than depletes me. The process of writing a grant and generating knowledge is just exciting. So if you're passionate about it, you can do it. It takes planning, it takes training, it takes feats and learning from them, but it is the most fulfilling part, I think, of being a surgeon that one can have.
Dr. Nyame, any final words?
Yeah, all the things that were said. Yeah, I will say this. The one thing I didn't realize until I left my institution was how diverse funded research can be, right? My dad's a biochemist. I was like, you only get grants if you're like, got a lab and a pipette, and then you're like finding out about PCORI, and you're like, wait a minute, all this like outcomes research I wanted to do, there's like millions of dollars to support that and doing something neat. And so, I think this was mentioned earlier, we don't think in 5, 10, 20-year plans. Don't develop that. And if your passion is going to be around some questions and some subject area, there's a way to build a funded, investigator career around that. And there are tons of people within urology. You may not know them, but you can get connected to them through people in your institution, through this meeting. And I think you can make those steps towards that career success. And it is incredibly fulfilling. For me, it's the patient engagement, it's the community like facing work that I'm doing now that in this like really amazing way counters like my clinical practice, which I it's like my first love, but this is like it's like your children, right? You love them equally, so allegedly.
Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did, so we appreciate it.
This has been an AUA Inside Tract podcast brought to you by the Residents and Fellows Committee. Check out the AUA University podcast for weekly episodes on the latest clinical updates and advances in urology. For more information about the AUA and membership, visit auanet.org.